Good afternoon. Welcome back to Storytime. Hope you're enjoying this beautiful day. We continue our book, Too Much Salt and Pepper, with Chapter 11, An Odor with a Stripe Down Its Back, a lesson in appreciation. The world was clean next morning after the rain. The forest seemed to have found an extra springtime. Everything appeared refreshed and ready to go again and to grow again. The rain-soaked foliage glowed a glorified green. Creatures hurried about as if to make up for the previous day of inactivity. Frail spider webs spread across branches of bushes and low trees, looking as if they might be fingerprints left by forest fairies. Long leaves of red pines wore sparkling gems at their tips, jewels made of drops of water hoarded from the deluge. And everywhere the sun's rays struck, they revealed such vibrant beauty that it seemed the whole world might momentarily break forth into song. Carol was watching the morning. She stood in silence, her gaze resting on one lovely thing after another. "And what are your thoughts this morning, young lady?" I asked as Jenny and I walked up to her. She laughed. "It is hard for me to put into words," she said. "I have been thinking about this rain. I never knew before how important it is, nor how beautiful. Rain always seems to be something that keeps you from having a good time, something to get your feet wet or spoil a picnic or a football game. I didn't realize it is a way of making the world lovelier. Learning appreciation, aren't you?" said Jenny. "And how much we all need to learn that." "Suppose we make that our subject for today," I suggested. "Let's learn to appreciate things by understanding them a bit better." "It was a good idea," agreed Carol. "Fine thought, Jenny." "Honk, honk," said Salt from his perch high in a tree, apparently giving his approval. "This will be a day on the trails, then," I said, planning aloud. "Let us pack our lunch, fill canteens with water. Get out the binoculars, cameras, the magnifying glass, and let's look closer at things than we have ever before. For if we see things well, we shall understand them, and if we understand them, we shall appreciate them. Who was it that said that all evil is ignorance, and all ignorance evil? This is true. When we understand things of creation, we find their worth and beauty. And if we believe they have neither worth nor beauty, we do not understand them." That day we pried into nooks and corners of nature that were new to Carol. Across our trail went a tiny grass snake. He wriggled his way over the moist rug of leaves, under logs and across beds of moss. We stood watching his remarkable flowing way of traveling. Carol held back. "It is the only creature I fear a little," she explained, a bit apologetically. "I wish I didn't." "What is it you fear about them?" I asked. "Oh, they are cold, clammy, and they wiggle." We laughed. Carol would find that most people share her fear of snakes. Yet snakes are not cold, and they are not clammy. They wiggle, but surely that is no more threatening than to fly, walk, or swim. It is just their way of getting around. Some way this abhorrence of snakes has crept into human thought through the ages, and not many rise above it. Come, Carol, look more closely at this little fellow, who has paused at the foot of a stump and looks up at us, running his forked tongue out and in so rapidly. What is he doing? Merely getting acquainted with the world about him. This is his way of learning things. As the sense of smell is to the wolf, as seeing is to the hawk, as hearing is to the deer. No, he is not poisonous, and he will not harm you. And nowhere in all these northern forests are there any poisonous snakes. The few species that we have are valuable, for they destroy many vermin, keep down the population of insects and small rodents, which could become serious pests if there were nothing to control them. These snakes are part of the balance of nature, and they would be sadly missed if they were gone. Come, Carol, stoop over this tiny green creature. Let go of your fear for just a moment and see his beauty. No bird in all the world is more brilliantly colored than he. Before our experience with the snake was over, Carol had overcome much of her fear. We had picked him up, held him in our hands, and she had found he was not cold and clammy. She had watched him wiggle his way along and had learned what a marvelous way of travel it is. Her final remark probably indicated a complete change of thought about him and his kind. "Oh, I think he's cute," she said, and she called a friendly goodbye to him as he found his way back into the brush. That day Carol learned that there is not a creature in all the North Woods that is dangerous to human beings. She learned that wolves, wildcats, lynx, bears have their places in nature's scheme, but that they avoid contact with people. She looked through the magnifying glass at little plants hard to see with the unaided eye, the tiny lichens and mosses, and a whole new world of beauty opened to her. With the aid of binoculars, she followed the flights of crows, ravens, hawks, and eagles, and learned that these birds too have a place in nature's plans. We studied everything that came to our attention, thought upon it, endeavored to understand it. By noon we were a bit tired from our efforts. We climbed a high hill from which we could see the wooded country for miles around. There we sat eating our lunch and summarizing our experiences. "Is this the same world that was here last week?" asked Carol, looking about her. "It seems so different to me." "It is exactly the same world," assured Jenny, laughing. "It is always the same, only our thoughts of it change. As we learn to understand it, we feel more of its purposes, find more of its beauty, and sense more of its harmony. It is in getting close to nature that we overcome our ignorance and learn that which makes us see the world in a more beautiful light. Nature will not bring our facts to us. We must get out in the world, dip our hands in it, walk along with its creatures, and gather our information, as we do berries, from the wildwood itself." Because Carol had that day looked at one little snake closely, all snakes were a little less feared, a little better understood. Because we knew Inky, Salt, and Pepper intimately, all porcupines were closer, more important. By their friendship, Rack and Ruin had led us to know all raccoons better. There is a story told of Charles Lamb which illustrates this point. He was walking along with a friend one day when suddenly he nudged his companion and pointed across the street. "Do you see that man?" he asked. Yes, his friend did. "I hate that fellow," declared Mr. Lamb. His friend was shocked at such words coming from him and asked, "Why? Do you know him?" "No," said Charles Lamb. "If I did, I know I couldn't hate him." It is in our lack of understanding, our ignorance, that our hatred and prejudice are formed. In our appraisal of animals as well as of people. Now, as we sat on the hilltop talking of these things, a passing breeze brought an interruption. It was the pungent, all-pervading odor of a skunk. Jenny jumped to her feet, thinking the animal was immediately at hand, though really he was at a safe distance. Carol pinched her nose. "I guess that is what animal we won't get close to," she said, speaking as best she could in the circumstances. "Not right now, at least," I agreed, "but Carol, he is no exception. Did I tell you of our pet skunk? The little fellow that taught us that his kind is all right in spite of their perfume?" Do you did it," said Carol, hanging on to her nose. "I'd like to hear it if I could listen this way." "All right," I said, laughing. "Listen as you please. I think this story will give you a better idea of a skunk than you will get just from his odor. Some years ago, on a silent August night, a companion and I were standing still in the darkened forest back at the sanctuary cabin. We heard some little animal moving around near us, though we paid no attention to it at first. It would be strange indeed if something were not prowling around constantly at the sanctuary. The little something or other circled about us, rustling leaves and occasionally cracking small twigs. We felt little concern until it came up and sniffed at our very feet. Then we thought it time to investigate, especially were we puzzled about that sniff. It was quite a different sniff from that of contemporary pets. So a flashlight was brought into play. The beam revealed a skunk standing between us, though my friend and I were barely 3 feet apart. Now, a skunk is not the offending, obnoxious creature people generally think him to be. He is not just a bad odor with a white stripe down its back. That nose-curling, eye-watering odor of his is his defense, and nothing else. It is a perfect defense, to be sure, but he does not use it unless annoyed or attacked. It is a fluid contained in a sac located at the base of his tail and is forced out in a spray or stream by muscular contraction. The fluid itself can be expelled only to a distance of 8 or 10 feet, but playful little breezes love to pick up the scent, carrying it far and wide, making every living thing that has a nose wish it didn't have, for the time at least. Yet the creature itself is not aggressive, not anxious to be unpleasant. He simply puts new emphasis on the first rule a man should know about dealing with wildlife. Let us alone, and we will let you alone. However, I am always anxious that a skunk fully understand I am letting him alone. I want no misunderstandings. That was the way my companion and I felt that night at the sanctuary. Here was this little striped beauty, so close either of us could have touched him simply by stooping. He was unexcited and unafraid. We certainly wanted to keep him that way. We stood so still, we hardly ventured to breathe. But our little friend showed not the least evidence of alarm. and he does have such evidence, which is well to know. If annoyed, he will first chatter his teeth, an act which says in substance, "Mister, I don't mean you any harm, and for your sake, more than mine, I hope you don't mean any for me either." When his teeth begin their chatter, it is well to give him a wide berth, though there are 2 other warnings given before calamity comes. Next, he will stamp and scratch the ground with his front feet. This move is a bit more ominous and says, "Now, mister, I am trying to tell you what is best for your own good. You're asking for trouble. Well, you'll get it if you don't watch out. Don't come any closer or else." This advice is quite good, and there has been many a suit of clothes lost to mankind because it was not followed soon enough. The skunk is not anxious for trouble. It is patient. But those who stay beyond this second warning had better be nimble-footed. The skunk will slowly raise his tail and hesitate for just one short moment. This is the last chance, you tormentor, whatever or whoever you are. Run, jump, fly, climb a tree, call a taxicab, do something, and do it quickly. For in this move, the skunk says, "I hate to do this, but you're asking for it. Maybe you're just ignorant. Maybe you don't know that I am complete master of some 400 square feet about the place where I stand." He still hesitates, but one more move on the part of his foolish opponent, one thing that convinces him that he is really threatened, and there will come that stream or spray of yellowish fluid which brings dismay and defeat to all his enemies. It is a shot with amazing accuracy at any angle, and woe be unto the creature within its range. While the results of this deluge of perfume are seldom serious, still the experience is sufficient to change the plans of any animal in the forest. The battle is over when the skunk has declared himself. There is no second attack by him nor on him. If it is an animal that has been so foolish, it is probably rolling around on the ground trying vainly to rid itself of its troubles. If it is a man who has been on the receiving end, he is a social outcast for some time to come. That night our friend bore us no ill will, and we were quite anxious not to create any. We stood very still while he sniffed about us, once rising and placing his front paws on my knee. I dropped several peanuts near him from a stock carried in my pocket, but he was not interested. When he had moved a few feet away, so that I felt it safe in doing so, I went into the cabin and brought some bread for him. "Here, Halitosis," I called as I tossed a slice to him, and thereby he was named. He accepted the bread with enthusiasm. He did not mind in the least if we walked about him. No doubt he had been coming to our feeding station for some time without giving us a chance to see him. Probably he had cultivated a taste for bread by sharing that left out for raccoons, and likely he had absorbed some of the confidence common to animals at the sanctuary. After eating several slices of bread, he moved slowly into the darkness. "Come again, Halitosis," my companion called after him, and Halitosis did. We saw more and more of him in the days that followed. He developed such confidence that he would come to us on the trail. He took bread from our fingers and loved to have us scratch his head. Once we coaxed him into the kitchen and fed him there, but we never did that again. During his stay, a pan fell from a hook, making a startling noise. Halitosis went through all 3 of his warnings in record time. He chattered his teeth, stamped his feet, and raised his tail almost simultaneously. Fortunately, he stopped there, though we tremble to think what might have happened had another pan fallen at that moment. For 2 years we had the friendship of this interesting, useful, and really beautiful creature. He remembered us from season to season. In those 2 years, only once did he use that defensive and offensive odor of his. Even then, we had to admit it was justified. We have a rule at the sanctuary that no dogs come there. We love dogs, and someday hope to have one raised in the spirit of the place, so that he will live at peace with the forest creatures. But strange dogs would hardly understand. It was a strange dog that caused Halitosis to break his fine record of non-belligerence. It all happened one eventful day when Butch, a fox terrier, beautified by a recent bath, was brought to the sanctuary by his 2 masters, a man and his wife. We were all out on a trail at the time they came up to our pier in their launch. Not knowing of our ruling about dogs, they landed, released their pampered pet, and all went strolling about the nearby trails. While the 2 people admired the beauties of nature, Butch had a wonderful time chasing chipmunks and squirrels. All was well for a time, then suddenly, all 3 of the visitors, woman, man, and dog, stopped short and stared at something a few feet ahead of them in the trail. There stood Halitosis, looking upon them with interest and not a little challenge. Who were these strangers that had come to his domain, and what was that funny-looking animal who acted as if he owned the whole earth? The people stood still, and that was wise. But Butch didn't, and that was foolish. Perhaps hoping to be a hero in the eyes of his masters, he advanced toward the innocent-looking kitty, barking his loudest. Away off in the woods we heard those barks. We started back to the cabin, but arrived too late. In the meantime, Butch came on toward this stubborn creature who dared stand still and defy him. The two people called commands for the dog to come back, but in vain. Halitosis chattered his teeth. Butch came on. Halitosis beat the ground with his front feet. Butch came on, barking his egotism. Halitosis raised his tail, but Butch only barked the more furiously and approached closer. Then, the air between the two animals was suddenly filled with a fine yellowish mist that centered upon the dog. Butch turned a somersault backwards. He was totally unprepared for this chemical warfare. Bewildered, surprised, dismayed, his egotism completely deflated, he coughed and sneezed violently and rolled about on the ground. His masters turned and made an inglorious but wise retreat. Halitosis waddled slowly away as if nothing had happened. When we arrived, we looked upon a strange sight. Obviously, Butch had been a close companion with his masters. With childlike trust, he had always run to them whenever hungry or in trouble. Now he was in trouble, plenty of it, and he wanted his masters. Hence he ran to them, or at least toward them. But for some reason he could not understand, he was not so welcome as usual. His masters ran away, Butch after them. This was the spectacle we saw as we came up over the last ridge and looked at the scene of the battle. Two people racing frantically through the brush, calling to Butch to go away. Butch following just as frantically, yipping at the top of his voice. Comprehending the situation, the atmosphere still bearing record of what had happened, we produced an old blanket. Through our combined efforts, the disillusioned and trembling Butch was caught and wrapped in it. His distressed masters took the dog home, and there to struggle with the problem of making him sweet and savory again. They called back that they would return the blanket, but we implored them not to. Just bury it, we said. As they left, Halitosis was standing on a little knoll, calmly and unresentfully watching them. In a letter that came from these people bearing an apology, they referred to him as that awful animal. But I never told Halitosis about this. He wasn't mad at anyone and went right on befriending the human race by eating harmful bugs, beetles, grubs, rats, and mice, and I did not want him to think this service was not appreciated. While I told this story, the summer breeze continued to bring us strong messages from the skunk somewhere in the brush. Carol had let go of her nose, saying, "I suppose even his odor isn't so bad when you have learned to appreciate him." "Whew," I said, grabbing my own nose and pinching violently, as a fresh blast of skunk greeting came upon us. "It don't make any difference how nice he is. He smells just as bad." "I understand what you mean," agreed Jenny. Our hilltop seemed to be a good place to leave at that time. We took to the trails again and filled our afternoon with continued efforts at appreciating our world. Evening brought a happy surprise. Friends who lived near the sanctuary, who know the forest well and love it deeply, came to call on us. We all gathered about a campfire, choosing a point on our island where we could watch the fading afterglow in the west and the rising evening star in the east. There is good medicine in a campfire, medicine that heals our mixed-up thoughts and gets us into step with the universe. Perhaps it is because the campfire has in its history a record of security as well as warmth. Wilderness travelers have always gathered about it, finding its warm rays like protecting arms. Our fire gave us that feeling of security that night. Its golden glow played upon the trunks of pine trees, set grotesque shadows to dancing in the surrounding woods, and lighted the faces of those who sat in the circle. Smiles are a bit brighter about a campfire, laughter a bit more merry, songs are more sincere when accompanied by the crackle of burning cedar. Friendships seem more dear. I took Carol out in the canoe a short distance from the island so that she could look back on the scene. This is an experience every lover of beauty should have. When we returned to the circle, conversation had taken a happy trend. Each one was asked to tell a nature story from his own experience, a story that would fit into our thought of appreciation. A forester told something of how trees serve the human race, how they have given us shelter through the ages. This green brotherhood we call the forest holds the earth in place with its roots, holds the rain for us in dry seasons, mellows the heat in summer and the cold of winter, and by its deposit of leaves helps us build the very soil in which grows our food. From trees come the lumber for our homes, ships, and factories. They give us paper on which to record our news and knowledge, chemicals for our industries, and the coal we burn is but the trees of earlier ages. In their spacious branches nest the birds. In the cool and quiet of their groves, tired men have found rest. Indeed, the list of their blessings seemed endless. Another member of the circle told us of the invaluable service the earthworm does in its treatment of our soil. And there were stories all true of dogs that had saved human lives, of horses in amazing bits of devotion and intelligence. Salt joined the party uninvited and honked along with the general conversation, perhaps saying he had experienced with human beings, and while they could improve, they weren't so bad. But one story in particular we shall all remember. It is a remarkable adventure with a loon, the experience of our friends who told it. One day, in the early winter, those friends were returning to their home, having made a trip to the nearby town. The first crystalline beauty of winter rested upon the forest, and lakes were closed over with newly formed ice. It was on one of these lakes that they discovered some living creature obviously in trouble. Closer investigation revealed that it was a loon. The bird was trying to fly but could not get under way, for a loon is so big and heavy, his wings so relatively small, that he cannot rise into the air unless he is on water. He must gain his primary momentum from rapid swimming, coupled with the motion of his wings, and only after he has gone a considerable distance in this manner will he be able to take off. Hence on land he is helpless either to fly or walk. He casts himself forward, slides on his breast, and crawls along in a most awkward and original fashion. This creature had made some miscalculation in landing on that lake. Perhaps something was wrong with him and he had to land, or maybe the new ice still clear looked like water to him. Anyway, there he was, on a flat, hard surface from which he could not rise. At considerable risk to themselves, my friends went out on the thin ice to rescue the bird. At first he fought with them, but they succeeded in throwing a coat over him and bringing him to shore. His great size amazed them. They pondered some method of getting him into the air, but knowing the limitations of such birds, they took him home to care for him. Some frozen fish were obtained for him, and with the offer of this food, his attitude changed at once toward his benefactors. The fish was cut up in strips that he swallowed whole. He seemed to understand immediately that no one would harm him, and with abandon and much awkwardness he tried to climb in the lap of the one feeding him. He was so comical in his actions that they named him on the spot, Ludi the Ludicrous Loon. If Ludi had searched the country over, he could not have found for him a better home. 2 tubs were put at his service, one filled with water where he could and did splash around at will, the other filled with blankets to serve as a nest. When he was first placed in his tub nest, he did not take to it, but cast himself out and made away as fast as he could. He paused, seemed to think better of his action, and immediately returned, jumping into his man-made home. From then on, it was his. He understood it that way, he liked it, and he returned to it whenever he sought rest or refuge. There was a big old cat in that home, and at first the people were concerned as to his idea about the big bird. The 2 creatures eyed each other thoroughly, apparently decided everything was all right, and thereafter were friends. Once the people witnessed a little event which gave them momentary alarm. Ludi's tubs had been placed in the basement. The people saw the cat go through the open basement door and down the steps. Looking after him, they saw him make a sudden jump into the tub nest where Ludi was resting. They fancied he was attacking the bird and ran to the rescue, but on arriving they saw the cat emerge with a good-sized rat in his mouth. They never suspected the cat after this. Ludi was much loved in that home, and he was devoted to his human friends too. Yet he would tolerate no strangers to come near him, nor did he want his friends to be too close if they were wearing clothes that were new to him. He ate about 3 pounds of fish daily. Only one part of the experience bore the least unpleasantness to these people, and that was Ludi's constant calling. Long had they loved this sound out of doors, but when it is uttered in the house, it reached a new and distressing melancholy pitch. It seemed a bit different from other loon calls, too. There was more loneliness in it, as if in it he were reaching out for his wild freedom, or calling to some mate who could not answer. When real cold weather came, Ludi was moved up into the kitchen, tubs and all. Here he found new pleasures that he loved. He was closer to his human family, for whom he was developing a deep affection. Particularly did he like the evening gatherings about the fireplace. As the family finished its activity of the day and drew chairs before the fire, from the kitchen would come a violent thump. No one was concerned, for it was just Ludi getting out of his tub nest. Then there would be a series of thumps as the great bird waddled and hobbled his way awkwardly into the living room. Right up into the family circle he would come, murmuring his happiness and settling close to one he loved in particular, who would unceasingly pet him. He would stay there through the evening until the warmth of the fire had made him sleepy. Then, without ceremony, he would return, sliding, slipping, flopping, falling, back to the tub, and retire for the night. Ludi came in November. It was the hope of his friends that they could care for him until spring, when the lakes would open again and he could live naturally. But one night in late February, Ludi went to sleep and did not waken again. Perhaps he arose on wings we could not see, calling anew in tones we could not hear, into a land that welcomed his free, wilderness-loving spirit. At any rate, Ludi lived to teach us anew the beauty of animal character, and to learn himself that there are human beings who love and appreciate living things. For now, when we hear the weird cries of this strange creature, we think not in terms of a crazy bird, but of the intelligence and friendliness we know is there. A campfire party ends slowly. In fact, it is difficult to tell the exact moment when it ceases to be. Our fire burned low until it was only a bed of glowing coals. Our friends paddled unhurriedly away in their canoes, calling and singing back to us from far out in the darkness. We sang bits of the evening songs as we walked to the cabin. Jenny made a discovery. "Why, Carol, dear, you are crying," she exclaimed, hurrying to the child, who stood looking out a window. Big tears were coursing down her cheeks, but immediately we knew they were not from sadness, for there was a smile playing about just back of them. "I don't know what else to do," said Carol. "I tried laughing and singing and talking, but none of them tells enough." We understood. One has sensed little of the real beauty of the natural world if he has not been moved to tears. Hope you enjoyed Storytime this week. God bless. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great weekend. We will see you all on Monday, 4 o'clock, same time, same place. Hope you again have a wonderful weekend. God bless.